You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, conversations with the icons of our time.
That's one of the questions that she's frequently asked. How could you, coming from that black experience, marry an oppressor?
But you weren't. Your folks weren't oppressors. You were not an oppressor. I married you because I love you.
William Cohen and Janet Langhart Cohen today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Well, we're all familiar with that old saw that opposites attract. But how opposite is too opposite? At first glance, it might have seemed that William Cohen and Janet Langhart were just too opposite to be a successful couple. Cohen was white, Jewish, Republican. Langhart was black, Christian, Democrat. But when journalist Langhart interviewed Senator Cohen, something sparked, and by 1996, they were married. The following year, President Bill Clinton named Cohen his defense secretary. Now, the couple's marriage has largely been sustained by a mutual empathy they have for the racial or religious discrimination each has faced since childhood. In 2007, William Cohen and Janet Langhart Cohen co-wrote a book called Love in Black and White. And that's when I had the chance to sit down with the two of them for a joint interview. So here now from 2007, William Cohen and Janet Langhart Cohen.
I notice most of the media attention seems to be focused or coming from the angle, the opposites attract. But I think one of the points you're making in your book, is it not, is that there is more than perhaps bonding you together than the opposites that have attracted.
I think people see the opposites. The opposites are more from their point of view than from our point of view. We're obviously male, female, black, white.
Republican, Democrat.
That's the mixed marriage part. But we come together on our principles and our values. And that's what I think, along with other things, enables us to have a wonderful marriage.
Well, we both started out at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Janet a little bit further down than me, but we started from modest homes. And we were able to overcome bigotry, in my case, anti-Semitism, and Janet, racism. And what brought us together, I think, is the fact that we both understand what it's like to be the object of someone else's dislike or hatred. And that made us, I think, sensitive to each other's personalities and principles, as Janet has said, that we have both adhered to what we believe in, and that has sustained us over the years.
I did wonder if maybe the commonality of having been at some point in your life marginalized overcomes whatever physical or ethnic or racial kind of differences there are between you.
Well, I think it gave us great empathy for each other's plight. Certainly, Bill for me. Bill suffered anti-Semitism as a young boy growing up in Bangor, Maine, because his father was Jewish. I suffered from racism because of segregation, Jim Crow, and apartheid America. So I think those two isms made us somewhat mavericks and outcasts. And
being on the outside, of being excluded from the mainstream. And I think that is basically the story of our lives, and how you can be excluded from the mainstream, and nonetheless, given this great country of ours, you can still overcome those obstacles that are placed in your way if you persevere, if you have strong family values, as Janet had a terrific mother who overcome enormous obstacles to invest in her values of regarding other people as human beings and not as color.
Yeah, my mother taught me that at 7 years old, an incident happened, and she said, "You are a little colored girl, and there will be people who won't like you because you're colored. But you must promise me that you will never practice that on others. You must never judge or hurt other people for something they can't help." And I think that has enabled me to, beyond my feelings of disliking racism and disliking bullies and being somewhat of a follower of Malcolm X, to come out of that revolutionary mentality and still reach across the color line and love Bill, despite that. So,
well, that's one of the questions that she's frequently asked. How could you, coming from that black experience, possibly cross the color line and marry an oppressor or someone who was of the family of the oppressors such?
But you weren't. Your folks weren't oppressors. You were not an oppressor.
I
didn't marry your color. I married you because I love you.
Oh, I know that, but I'm talking about what...
You two need a moment here?
No, what other people ask her, how could you do this? And Janet will say, look, I was brought up to look at people as people and not as a color. And I could love someone like me by virtue of, the values implanted by her mother.
And I didn't hate white people. I hated racism. And if I were to deny myself the opportunity of loving Bill based on his color, I would be doing the very thing that I've asked other people of the majority society not to do to us. So it's really complicated. And marrying Bill, it made me Mrs. Cohen. It didn't make me white. It didn't give me amnesia. So I can understand why people might ask that question, because racism has perverted all of our notions about race and gender and class and religion.
Well, Don Imus once said when he discovered that Jen and I were engaged or about to be married, he said that I was the whitest man in America. And then we had Michael Eric Dyson, who gave a presentation at Politics and Prose recently. He said, I'm the blackest white man he knows.
That was quite an endorsement from Michael Eric Dyson, because he's written a book debating race. And have you interviewed him yet? In that book, he talks a great deal like his other books about the problem we have in this country on race.
Well, I gather that your intent with this book was not to sit down and write a history book, but in telling your own story, you have, in effect, told us a history story, haven't you?
I think that's true, and that was something I learned in the process of doing it, because we were talking about our parallel lives, and we both grew up in the shadow of World War II, and that's the first bookend of our lives, and as I mentioned about apartheid America, and it's a love story between Bill and me, but between us and our country, and what was happening in our country at the time, to see its growth. And what we discovered is our country was coming of age just as we were coming of age.
And here we are witnessing an anniversary of Selma, Alabama. And 42 years later, you can see John Lewis, who's a member of Congress, who was out on those front lines, who was being beaten and whipped by the police when dogs set upon him. And yet he's now a leading figure in the United States Congress. And you can have a female, Mrs. Clinton, Senator Clinton, running for the presidency, and a Barack Obama running for the presidency, and you can see how much and how far this country has come in 42 years, because it wasn't that long ago that you had the marches, to be sure, in Alabama. 42 years, 20 years before that, you had the Holocaust that was taking place in Europe. So in our lifetime, we've seen how hatred has been unleashed against people because of their ethnicity, their faith, their religion, and their race.
And we also see, I saw Mrs. Clinton, Senator Clinton, speak down in Alabama today at a different church than Barack Obama, but they each had a wonderful message. Her message is that this movement that enabled me, a black woman or a black male, to succeed in whatever, to realize Dr. King's dream, it enabled her to realize a dream. And because we didn't get the Equal Rights Amendment, we can't say it was the Equal Rights Amendment that enabled, I believe, 16 white women to serve in the U.S. Senate, and we only have one black male. So it was a movement. It was a movement not just for civil rights and human rights, not just for black people, but for all people.
Yet we have not yet reached the point where a black-white marriage is so commonplace that people say, why are you writing a book about this? Will we ever reach the point where you'll be non-news?
That's one of the reasons I wanted to participate in Bill's book. This is really his voice, and I'm contributing to that. I wanted to open up the dialogue so we could all talk more about race and racism. Black History Month isn't just my history, it's Bill's history too. If we're talking about slavery, we can't just talk about the slave and not talk about the master. So I think this book will hopefully open it up for everybody to grapple with it so they can see we're not that different. We've already cracked the human genome to know that race is some sort of myth, some pernicious fiction that we're using, or the larger society uses to control the smaller groups. So I think in reading our book, you'll see a love story, you'll see patriotism, and you'll see a history lesson.
I remember there was advice from Ann Landers a number of years ago. Bless her heart. She said that the only way that two people from different faiths could make a successful marriage is if neither felt very passionate about their faith. You think that's a logical answer in these times?
I think that there is something to her statement. Although Janet is quite passionate about having been raised as a Southern Baptist, and the faith that her mother certainly carried with her throughout her entire life. I think Janet also has been one of these individuals who's always questioning, asking questions, challenging convention. I myself was outside the faith, not by virtue of choice on my part, but by virtue of the Jewish community decided that I really wasn't part of that community. So I left that faith after studying it as seriously as a student and embraced Unitarianism. In terms of dealing with existential questions of what is our place on earth, what are we here for, all of these questions that we try to come to grips with as to try to inquire and to test and to challenge and to seek some answers to these questions, which I think is part of the human condition. But we both feel a spirituality that is common. And we both feel that there is something much greater than ourselves, that there is a force in the universe. We don't quite understand it in terms of its shape, its mission, what our role is, where we go. But we know that there's a force out there that and we are children of that universe.
I think it might be difficult for some interfaith couples to marry and come together if they had dogmas, if they were very staunch in their respective faiths. That might be harder to penetrate, because one of the things that sent me on a search, just one of the things, was that I found when it comes to God, that word God, or that other word religion, people seem to draw a line in the sand. You're right, or I'm right rather, and you're wrong, and it's very divisive. So I think Bill and I lucked out again in that I did have a deep faith. I do have a deep faith, but I question it. And I believe it is in the New Testament that we're told we can ask, and it shall be given.
But we feel comfortable going in any religious institution. We can walk into a Catholic church,
St.
which we
Patrick's
do at St.
Cathedral.
Patrick's. From time whenever we're in New York, I can go into a synagogue. We can celebrate Hanukkah, which we have this past year. So we embrace all of the religions, and because there's only one truth. And how people get there, it depends upon their geography, their history, etc. But there's one truth.
I celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday for the first time in a synagogue this year. And we had our first, Bill's going to teach me how to say Hanukkah.
Yeah, very good.
We celebrated Hanukkah in our home. We had a beautiful menorah, a menorah that found me. And then after we lit the candle at sunset, we went off into the other room, in our breakfast room, and enjoyed our Christmas tree. So we have the best of all worlds.
It sounds like my house. I'm Protestant and my wife is Jewish. So this is now, if we could only convince Capitol Hill that in terms of politics, there's only one truth and that everybody has a because it strikes me that an outsider might assume that a Republican and a Democrat would have to box up and check their politics at the door, otherwise they would never be able to get along. I don't sense, though, that the two of you put a lid on it when you're at home. I
think we're the first members of the third party when we're at home, because Bill is a moderate Republican, and I never think of him in terms of politics, maybe because we agree on so many important issues, social issues, but he's a statesman. You know, this man is a statesman. Who else would have worked so well in the cabinet of Bill Clinton? And then go and carry the water for the president during the days the president was having a very difficult time on that bombing. At the same time they were considering impeaching him, it was the Republican who went to the majority and spoke on behalf of our president and convinced him that this was not wag the dog.
Right.
So,
but I'm guessing that the two of you probably have some spirited discussions from time to time.
We do. No, I'm not going to deny that.
That's
it's
right.
all...
And we have to fess up. What
would you say we
argue all the time, and we argue about the candidates and their positions. We debate the war, to be sure. Janet was an outspoken critic from the very beginning. And
not as outspoken as I wanted to be, because you told me to temper it be diplomatic. I'm the wife of a former Secretary of Defense. It would be unbecoming.
No, it's not a question of unbecoming. It's a question of we have troops. We have 140,000 troops there in risking life and limb at this moment. And I want to be careful that anything that I say not in any way impair their ability to carry out their mission. And Janet is so passionate on this issue because she's been going to Walter Reed, and she's been dealing with those who've lost limbs and brains and the families and the hardship. And so her anger and her passion is something that I respect and I celebrate in terms of how she cares for those who are serving us and their families. My position is I have to be more measured on it because I don't want to involve myself in this debate in a way that could in any way impair the morale of the troops, and so it's a slightly different approach to it. I share her concern about what's going on and the fact that we don't take care of the people who serve and sacrifice for us in the way that they should be cared for, well beyond Walter Reed, well out into the VA system, into rural America, red state, blue state America, where these young men and women don't get the kind of follow-up care that they really need.
We're talking about our country's history, and when I did my book, and I was delighted, Bill, that you interviewed me for that, I was writing my book before 9/11, and I had mixed emotions after 9/11 to talk about the history of our country, because it's not a pretty history, not all of it, to talk about racism and slavery and lynchings and Jim Crow. But I want to say we did have that. That is part of our history. We need to know that because it lives in us. But I do want to say that this is a great country. I've lived its nightmare, and I'm living its American dream, and the dream is better, that anything is possible here.
And I would say that there was a moment that really came home to me about the greatness of this country when Janet and I were on the deck of the USS Kennedy in New York Harbor on Independence Day 2000. And we stood there, I should say, looking at the Statue of Liberty. And the moon was up, and it was a beautiful night, and I had my arm around Janet, and I said, just think about this. I had a grandfather who immigrated from Russia without a penny in his pocket, and he came here, and he had to sail by Lady Liberty. And I wonder what he would think now that by him stepping out into the darkness with no notion of what the future would hold for him, that years later the little boy that he held in his lap would become Secretary of Defense, and that my wife, who is a descendant of slaves, would one day be on that deck with me as the First Lady of the Pentagon. That tells you a lot about this country.
Only in America.
William Cohen is now 82, and Janet Langhart Cohen is also 82. They celebrated their 28th anniversary last February. Now, you can get your copy of Love in Black and White by William Cohen and Janet Langhart Cohen by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. While you're at heardeverything.com, don't miss my 2007 interview with Paul Robeson Jr.
Instead of looking at people from the point of view of their culture, we are, more than any other country in the world, obsessed with looking at people through the lens of race as skin color.
And my 2003 conversation with the son of Martin Luther King Jr., Dexter Scott King.
I still am baffled how he, was able to raise a family, write several books, lead a major movement, and still make such an enormous contribution to humankind.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, we are marking an important anniversary, the 50th anniversary of a major historical event the United States had never seen before and hasn't seen since, the resignation of a president. We'll revisit my 1991 conversation with renowned Nixon biographer Stephen Ambrose.
I came to have a grudging and then a genuine admiration for him, and now having dealt with this period, 1974 to 1990, I've come to really like the man, which isn't easy to do. He doesn't want to be liked. He wants to be respected. He wants to be admired. He wants to be obeyed. He doesn't care if you like him or not.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.